Welcome to an all-new edition of Fanlight Zone Presents. My name is Ken M. You know me as the host of the ODPH podcast. I'm also the editor-chief here at FLZ. To my left, you're right at home. He's one of our comic editors, and you also know him as 607 TWS, the wrestling show's host. Please give a warm welcome to Rich.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. Sometimes this is work, sometimes it's pure enjoyment. Ladies and gentlemen, today I get to have my fanboy moment, so bear with me because we have an amazing creator joining us.
Yes, because if you follow Fanlight Zone, you know this creator's work is heavily covered. It is one of the most anticipated books. Every time it comes out, we see his name on it. It's getting videos, it's getting written reviews. Why? Because he's that damn good. And if you don't believe me, you obviously have not been reading Spencer and Locke, Savage Avengers, Cable Loving Chrome, The Devil That Wears My Face, Captain Planet and the Planeteers, Speed Racer, Space Ghost, and more importantly, coming to Kickstarter, the return of one of the most epic stories to ever hit the pages, the OZ. It is our honor and privilege to welcome back the one and only David Pepose to the show. David, what is going on?
Man, what an intro. I feel like you guys are just the best hype men ever. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk all things comics with you, in particular, the long-awaited return of the OZ, which is going to be coming back to Kickstarter on June 8th.
Oh, cannot wait for that. Obviously, this story has been going on for a few years, but how did this whole story come to be? Because this is a fantastic story.
You know, the OZ, for those who aren't familiar with the book, because it has been a long time coming, it's been in the works for years now. I pitched that book as What If the Hurt Locker Took Place in the Wizard of Oz? It's the story of Dorothy Gale's granddaughter and namesake, who's a disillusioned Iraq war veteran who's come back home and grappling with PTSD and finding her direction in the aftermath of what she saw overseas. And she's come back home to Kansas to take care of her ailing grandmother, who's been telling all these sort of tall tales about the land of Oz. One night, things get really bad for our new Dorothy, and she drives out into the cornfield in her Humvee. She's got her service pistol, and that's when the tornado hits, and she gets swept up in it and finds herself stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. And she realizes that Grandma's stories, they were all real, but also Grandma killing 2 wicked witches in a week and getting the Wizard of Oz to leave and then splitting. That's not the happy ending that we all were led to believe. That's a power vacuum that rivals that of Baghdad. And so now Dorothy kind of has to navigate all these rival factions that are led by her grandmother's former friends. So you have the Tin Soldier, who's sort of this like hulking juggernaut made out of like scrap metal, who's sort of the lead fighter for the resistance, led by the Wizard of Oz, this mysterious figure. You've got the Prince of Lions, the son of the Cowardly Lion, who his father was killed during some of the worst of the war, and he's trying to figure out. First off, he wears a mask. He's been assuming his father's identity, basically to try to keep the animal kingdom from splintering apart. While he's sitting there saying, like, how did my father do this? How did my father become this like fearless leader? And they're all trying to resist kind of this iron fist of the Scarecrow. He was the one who wanted a brain, and so he's used sort of that tactical genius to really kind of rule over the land of Oz with an iron fist. His means of sort of bringing this war-torn country together is to turn it into an endless war machine. And so he's been looking for the silver slippers in the hopes of invading our world next. And so Dorothy, as sort of her in this lineage that she finds herself in, becomes a war hero, and she sees this as maybe a second chance to get things right, to maybe someday liberate what is called the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ. This book has been in the works for a very long time. We did our first Kickstarter campaign, I believe, in 2020. We were doing this like kind of right around when my Aftershock book, Scout's Honor, came out. And then we did our second Kickstarter the following year. And right around then we won the Ringo Award for Best Single Issue for our first issue. It's funny though, because I feel like I've had kind of like a whole career since that last issue came out. And the reason for the delay, I want to make it very clear. Like, it wasn't like, oh, we need to like scramble to like write the thing. I actually wrote the OZ. It was one of my earliest ideas. Kind of on the heels of the second volume of Spencer and Locke. After that first book, that first Spencer and Locke came out, and I realized that maybe I could have a career as a writer, I wrote down a few extra ideas of what things I might want to tackle next. Going to the chapel was one of those ideas. The OZ was another one of those ideas. And it really just came down to just kind of getting the artwork together. We have an amazing artist on this book. Ruben Rojas is so talented. But I think something that is maybe easy to forget, especially in sort of corporate monthly comics, is that, these are handmade comics, made by real people with real lives. And life exactly kind of got in the way. Ruben got married, he had a kid, he was living in Spain during like the height of COVID. It took some time to kind of get those pages together, but Ruben is such a talented artist that he didn't want to cut any corners on this. This would have been very easy for him to just kind of leave us in a lurch. And so my thinking was, both for the sake of Ruben's sake, but also for the sake of the OZ and not compromising our sense of quality in that book, I wanted to make sure that he had the time that he needed to kind of put this book together, especially as I was sort of, snowballing with more and more projects from, Savage Avengers and Moon Knight City of the Dead to, Space Ghost and Captain Planet and Speed Racer. There was also a sense of the timing of it all, of how do I position the OZ at a window of time that we're not cannibalizing it with other work of mine that might be kind of, vying for its attention. But also just, are there things in the real world that might sort of put a damper on a Kickstarter? There was a bit of conversation last year about whether or not we would do it, towards, the holidays. And then there was the big strike over at Kickstarter, and we felt like that wasn't the right time to do it. So, there were a lot of sort of behind the scenes considerations of why now. The other big consideration was that I knew that we'd made readers wait, for this last issue. We wanted to make sure we did it right. And so the promise that I wanted to make to our Yellow Brick Road warriors who had backed us for the previous two campaigns is that you've waited this long. I'm not going to make you wait a second longer than you have to. We're launching this campaign with the book fully done. It is fully written, fully drawn, fully colored, fully lettered. Literally, all we have to do is just get the final print numbers from the campaign, so we can just tell the printer what exactly to print. We're also actually teaming up with Laguna Studios for our fulfillment in this campaign. So that way, I'm not the bottleneck. I previously hand packed and shipped all of our Kickstarter packages, over 1,200 of them, by myself in my apartment. My workload's a little bit more involved now. I have a baby on the way. I did not want to be the guy dragging heels on any of this stuff, and so the team at Laguna is going to be handling all the fulfillment to really kind of expedite getting rewards into people's hands. So yeah, this third issue is kind of like the big climax of what we've been building towards in the OZ. We've sort of we've introduced all of our players, all the sort of people that Dorothy's going to be teaming up with. And her quest to find the Silver Slippers has gone horribly sideways. As we left her in the end of our last issue, she has been captured by the Scarecrow's forces in the Gnome King's fortress. And to complicate matters, they had already found one of the Silver Slippers. They were looking for the second one. And one of those Silver Slippers has just latched itself to Dorothy's foot. And so she and the Scarecrow are at a little bit of a stalemate right now. He wants the Silver Slipper. He cannot kill her. If he does, the magic will just go away. So he needs to try to figure out, how can I force Dorothy to give this thing up? And Dorothy, meanwhile, is trying to figure out, how can I possibly get me and my friends out of captivity to save two worlds. So this really is kind of our big blockbuster epic finale. Ruben has done such an amazing job, particularly kind of with this big final battle that we've got planned. And the team that we're working with is just so amazing. Whitney Kogar is just one of the best, most talented colorists in the entire industry, and she and Ruben are just like an amazing dream team together. They look so good, and DC Hopkins, our amazing letterer, has really done has worked wonders in terms of making sure. I tend to pack my books quite a bit. I want to make sure you get your money's worth. This is a book that, characters they do some talking in addition to all the action, and he's really made it look so seamless, and that sort of makes the book even kind of feel a little more hefty. And we've got some amazing cover artists, that we've got in store. I'm going to keep a couple of them close to the vest, but like, for example, Mon House, he did variant covers for our previous 2 issues. He will be back for a 3rd. His cover looks really neat. We've got some other exciting covers as well. And we've got, a bunch of really fun reward tiers planned for everybody. I was saying this before we started recording, but we've structured this campaign to really be as streamlined as possible, to make sure that that we can really hit the ground running as soon as the campaign ends, as soon as the funds have been dispersed, that we don't have to necessarily chase anybody down in terms of figuring out, asking questions about what do you need. All we need to do is just sort of get your address from Kickstarter. So, but we've got some really fun reward tiers. We've got print and digital catch-up tiers. So if you missed our previous 2 campaigns, if you didn't know I existed a few years ago, you can catch up on the whole series. And we've got some good competitive prices on that. So you will be getting everything sort of at a discount. We've got actually different tiers involving my other trade paperback collections. So you can get, there's a tier with 5 of my Marvel books. And so you can get both volumes of Savage Avengers. You can get Cable, Love and Chrome, Moon Knight, City of the Dead, Punisher. We've got another tier for 5 of my creator-owned works. So you get both volumes of Spencer and Locke, and Going to the Chapel, and Devil Wears My Face, and Scout's Honor. And then we've got another tier that's got 5 of my licensed trades. So you'll get the first 2 volumes of Space Ghost, and you'll get the first 2 volumes of Speed Racer, and you'll get Captain Planet. And then we've got also just, if you want all of the variant covers for issue 3, we've got a tier for that comes at a discount. If you're a collector and you want all 14 covers for issues 1 through 3, we've got a tier for that. If you're somebody who wants to keep my puppy fed and kibble and my daughter wrapped in diapers, we've even got a whole tier where you can buy literally everything that's on offer. And then for retailers, we do have retailer discounts. And for one lucky retailer, I will do a store signing anywhere in the continental US. So we've got tiers for every level of involvement. We've got some really exciting stretch goals also planned. We've got exclusive stickers and pins. There's something for everybody in this campaign, but we know we've made our readers wait for this. We wanted to make sure we didn't cut any corners, that we didn't compromise the book's integrity. And looking at what we've got, I really think this book is going to be worth the wait.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just off the tiers alone, let alone the one that just completely just floored me here. There's a tier that you will come to a comic shop and do a signing?
Yes, there is. I've done that for both of our previous campaigns, and the stores are always super nice. It's one of those things, just given my workload and the fact that I have a baby on the way, I can only do this for one shop, but whichever shop jumps on it first, I will go anywhere in the continental US. I will do the signing, and we will do a fun little OZ launch party specifically for your store.
I'm just saying, I'm blown away. All the stuff there, I'm blown away, and guaranteed that it's going to get a lot of my money. Just
yes,
guaranteed. I love how Ken just stared at me when you were like, you can get all 14 variant copies, and he just looks over at me. You're the collector. I'm like, I do collect a lot of things, so who knows?
I mean, listen, I know things. Okay.
Listen, there might be some explaining I have to do because I just might have backed an expensive Kickstarter for Exquisite Corpses, but I'm just saying. But trust me, I will
details.
I will be spending. So when my wife hears this, please just know I still love you. Anyways, speaking of which, you brought up congratulations on the baby that's on the way.
Yes.
Obviously the congratulations order, and of course also congratulations on the workload. I mean, I understand that it's a lot of work and stuff, but you got a lot of amazing stuff out there.
Listen, I feel very lucky, both professionally and personally. every time you write a book, it's really a leap of faith. And I feel like the OZ especially is kind of one of those books. You know, this is a book that I started very early in my career. And this is a book that I actually had developed for a publisher back in the day. And we made it like all the way to the 1 yard line in terms of approvals. And what wound up happening is that there was another book that was similar enough in genre and tone that it sort of came down between us and them. And that was through the other book was with a more experienced creative team, with a little bit more of a name behind them. And I think, it was one of those things. It was so nice though that the editor who had kind of solicited this pitch, and they didn't have to do this. I remember they sent me an email kind of breaking the news, and they're like, "Listen, I'm really sorry. This thing was kind of like right at the 1 yard line. It was like real on the fence, and it didn't break your way. But I want you to know this is a good pitch. Don't give up on it." And that really kind of like got that was the snowball effect. As soon as I got that email, I think within a week I found Ruben Rojas and we brought him onto the book. And I think you never know how people are going to respond to books. I mean, I think working as a comic book creator, you do it in isolation. I'm lucky enough that I have friends of mine who like are also comics fans, and so I can always kind of gut check with them, and I always gut check with my wife because she's a voracious fiction reader and but not a comics fan. And so I feel like if I pitch something that she feels something and she feels like it's accessible, then that's good enough for me. That means that I can hand this book to either a diehard comics fan or somebody who, might be just curious about the medium for the first time and be able to say, "Hey, let me introduce you to your new favorite comic." And, I feel like the last few years have been like a nice, you always learn by doing. And I still feel like I have plenty more left to learn as a comics creator. And as somebody who loves learning and loves kind of, trying different things, as you can see from kind of the grab bag of different genres that I've played with. I like that. That's stimulating for me. And so, things like Space Ghost, I took a very different approach for the way that I've done things in the past. And, focusing a lot of done in one stories, eliminating narration, figuring out, taking kind of these older properties, learning all of the mythology, and then figuring out how do we recontextualize that. That last bit, as I sort of think about it, as I say it out loud, I feel like that's something I've been training to do my whole career, dating back to Spencer and Locke and the OZ. But I feel like I've gotten better as a writer. I feel like, you learn by doing, you learn by getting your reps. I remember when I was at Marvel, another writer who was more experienced than me referred to it as my medical residency, that like, you get thrown in the deep end, you work to capacity, and then you work past it, and you kind of learn, okay, my limits are actually a little bit further than what I thought they were. And it kind of, it forces you to hone your skills. And so it's been really nice, to see people responding to work like Space Ghost and Speed Racer. And I see all that as kind of that kind of continuum, which is the reason why I like to still do Kickstarters, which is there are different demographics in terms of the customer base in this business. You've got your Wednesday warriors, you've got your digital only readers, you've got the people who only buy stuff at conventions. You've got the people who they're Kickstarter aficionados. They want sort of artisanal comics straight from the creators directly into their hands. And they are less concerned with the timing or the price point of it all. And so for me, what's great about bringing a series like the OZ back is all these people who have gotten to know who I am through my later work, whether it's Scat's Honor, whether it's Savage Avengers, or whether it's Space Ghost or Captain Planet or Speed Racer. I always feel like there's, whenever you get to discover me, there's still a whole back catalog that you can explore. And I think the OZ is some of my best work. I think that really was sort of me being a little bit more of an experienced creator, but also like still kind of hungry and scrappy and really kind of swinging wild. And So yeah, it's kind of nice to look back on that book. And what was fun is that, working on this third one, as the art came in, I was able to kind of take another pass at it in terms of the script. I, with a little bit more of an experienced eye, being able to kind of like trim things down a little bit or rephrase things that I didn't, I didn't think in retrospect necessarily landed. And so, yeah, it really is kind of a nice way of looking back at sort of my career in kind of a larger sense. But yeah, busy. It's a freelancer's favorite four-letter word. And as far as the baby is concerned, she's already got her first comics. They're sitting in her nursery right now, and currently due to be born the first day of San Diego Comic-Con. So chip off the old block already. So you won't be seeing me at the show this year. I'll be there in spirit, but I will be hosting my own personal Comic-Con in my local hospital delivery room that weekend.
What an exciting time right now. Like I say, and especially like your work is now exploding on such a grander scale, if you will, just with the more high profile projects. But I know for me personally, the OZ is what I got into reading your work. That was the first issue I picked up. And honestly, I can say it is one of your best stories. And to see the growth and progression that you've done with this, since has been amazing to watch as a fan and, as now a reviewer in that aspect too. And to see like the last time we had issue 2 was about 2022.
Yes.
How soon did you get started on issue 3 with Ruben? And what would you say was the biggest?
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, or was it all done at once? And if not, what was the biggest creative changes, both you and him, on working on issue 3?
Well, so the thing was already written. Like I wrote the OZ. I started it before I started Scouts Honor, but then I wrote the rest of it kind of concurrently. So there was that period, kind of early COVID, where I would write a script of Scouts Honor one week, I would write a script of the OZ the next week, I would write a script of 10-Ton Titan Terrier the week after that. And so that was kind of like my way of sort of channeling, I think, some of my nervous energy during like the early days of COVID and Diamond having their shutdown and all the comics, there was that couple of months where they were only coming out digitally.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time that the Kickstarters all started, the book had already been fully written.
Okay.
And so it really came down to, it was just, getting the art put together. By the time we started the first Kickstarter, we had finished almost all of issues. The OZ is double sized. So I had written it originally as 6 issues. But as I decided to kind of make the jump to Kickstarter, I wanted to make sure readers got their money's worth, that they got, a nice bang for their buck, given that it was going to be a higher price point than a normal, subsidized, corporate subsidized book.
Mm-hmm.
So we made the decision to release them double sized. I felt like the book still kind of split naturally in that regard. So we were just about done with chapter 2 by the time we launched the first Kickstarter. When we did the second Kickstarter, we were about, I want to say, it was either 2/3 or 75% of the way done with the art. And even that, it was one of those things that we kind of underestimated the production time behind all that, but we also did not account for, our printer literally got hit by a hurricane, and we managed to get all of our books, but it did take some extra time to do all that. And so that experience, I was just, when we were doing the second Kickstarter, I had just started work on Savage Avengers. I'm not sure, I think we announced that I was working on Savage Avengers somewhere in the middle of that campaign. Okay. And so as I kind of thought about that experience, I was like, okay, knowing that I had sort of underestimated what the production time was going to be on that, I was like, okay, I don't want to even start the Kickstarter for the next one until we are like done. Because like, I didn't think it would be fair to make readers wait longer than they had waited from the last Kickstarter. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things that was sort of just like a constant kind of slow drip of art coming in, really over the course of, I want to say it was like we finished the artwork on the OZ over the summer. That's when Ruben turned in his final pages for it. And so yeah, then it took a little bit of time. We got Whitney. Whitney was just kind of working on colors for the thing as pages came in. And so yeah, and then I kind of, once we had sort of the final colors and all that, and I was able to come up for air, I was able to kind of take a final crack at the lettering, looking at how, the script now that the art had come in, figuring out things that I could cut or needed to rewrite. And then, yeah, DC Hopkins has been working on the lettering steadily, sort of in between his kind of various work. So yeah, it's just been sort of just like kind of a slow drip of artwork coming in. But a lot of it was also just sort of figuring out like, okay, when do we want to launch this? And the schedule kind of continuing to shift as other work was coming in, not because I felt like, oh, I need to prioritize X, Y, and Z. It was, I want to make sure that's not twisted, but it was just more of, oh, okay, this thing's getting announced at a time that I wasn't expecting. When am I going to get some like open runway that I can just focus on the OZ without having to sort of compete with the launch of Space Ghost or the launch of Speed Racer or the launch of Captain Planet? And so that kind of became its own kind of internal calculus of when we wanted to sort of pull the trigger on that. This was sort of like, okay, we've got the lettering is almost finished. The art is fully done. The timing finally sort of like the stars finally aligned. But yeah, it was a long time coming. And I think it, it speaks to one of the bigger challenges of doing, creator-owned work, but also self-published work in this industry is that like comics are still a very labor-intensive process. Because it's easy for me to, churn out a script in a week. Whereas like I'm still asking somebody to like put in manual labor to be able to draw these things, and especially somebody who has a baby at home, somebody who Spain was had a lot of, there was a lot of turmoil going on in Spain during COVID, and so those are things that you kind of have to be like, all right, like you have to remind yourself that like even though you feel a lot of pressure to deliver the work, and I continue to feel. We talked about this before we started recording, but I consider the OZ issue 3 and Spencer and Locke 3 the two biggest kind of unfinished businesses of my career. So this is something that poor Ruben was getting emails from me like every other week, just to be like, how are we doing? Where are we at? Checking in. I'm sure he was sick of me. Up until we finished it. But then, seeing the colors and seeing the lettering, I think he was very pleased to see that his efforts had sort of borne fruit. So yeah, it was just one of those things that like, you have to remember there's a human being on the other end of the pen and just kind of know like, all right, like, and when you see the pages, you'll see like Ruben certainly left it all out on the field with that. And I think that's kind of the benefit of doing a Kickstarter. Granted, if I could do it all over again, I maybe wouldn't have had quite as big of a gap between the second and third one. But it is the pacing is much more generous than sort of the monthly corporate comic scene, where books like Space Ghost in particular, Jonathan Loud draws like a demon. That guy is so fast. But I know that like, okay, like every 3 weeks I gotta get another script out because I know like Jonathan's that fast. Or even Speed Racer, like I know that every 4 to 5 weeks I gotta get another script out because Davide Tinto is that fast. The Kickstarter model, nobody's expecting to get their books monthly. And they are willing to wait. I think Kickstarter backers are a different breed. They seem and this is not to denigrate the Wednesday Warriors. Of course, we love the Wednesday Warriors and they keep the industry afloat. But you can tell that the priorities are different because they're not dealing primarily with licensed IP. They're not dealing with monthly licensed characters, like Spider-Man or Batman or what have you. And so the people who are doing Kickstarter, they are purposefully looking for stuff off the beaten path. They are purposefully looking for something that has a unique creative voice, that has a distinctive point of view artistically. And so, and like I said, they're very patient. Kickstarter backers, again, like, they're very passionate about comics as a medium, but they are very understanding that the creators are human beings. And so, I love the Kickstarter community. There's a reason I keep coming back. I love that sense of passion. And I love Kickstarter as a platform because of how directly I can interface with these readers. It's so nice to like hear when people say nice things about Space Ghost, but the OZ, I literally know every single person who's read that book. And every night of the campaign, I always take, an hour to just literally just send thank you notes, just to be like, hey, thank you for backing us. Thank you for reading. We're excited to show you what we've got in store. That's a unique experience. And a very validating one as a creator. But I Kickstarter is sort of that platform that really reminds me that every reader is very important. So I'm very excited to deliver the finale that those Yellow Brick Road Warriors truly deserve.
And when you brought that up, it's interesting as somebody who is obviously in both worlds, doing Kickstarter and of course loving to go to the shop every Wednesday. It is two different things for me because like I treat going. It's going to sound weird, but I treat going to the comic shop on Wednesday. It's kind of like the give me what I want. I'm a greedy fan. Let me bask in the things I love. But Kickstarter is kind of almost like Christmas. Like when you finally get that finished product and it finally comes to you and I didn't care about waiting. As a matter of fact, I love it when I have the surprise. I almost hate it when like they're like, okay, we're shipping it out because you're like, oh, I just wanted to come. So like when it just shows up at your door, you're like, oh, it's like the joy of Christmas, and you open it up and you get right to it, and it doesn't matter if you've already read the digital copy or not. You're instantly like going in, and it's kind of one of those. It's kind of a neat perspective from both ends, honestly.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's really just like I said, the Kickstarter backers are a different breed, and I think it also comes down to there's a lot of misconceptions about Kickstarter as a platform, especially when you have been working in the direct market. There's sort of that thought of oh, am I competing for attention? Am I competing for dollars? Am I competing for shelf space? And none of that is a concern on Kickstarter. Kickstarter, I think, is very collaborative. Inherently as a platform, really, stemming from the company culture. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because Kickstarter's business model is they want you to get funded. They really try to make it a point that like if the work is good enough, like let's because otherwise if you don't get funded, they don't get their cut. And so it becomes sort of one of those like I launched the OZ launched the same day as Scott Snyder's Nocterra. And if this was in the direct market, Scott dropping a Beyonce tape and that we'd be dead in the water. But doing it on Kickstarter, that meant all these fans of Scott's suddenly were flocking to Kickstarter, and every time that they would back Nocterra, they would then get, every time Scott would send out a message, Kickstarter would then add like, oh, and if you like this project, check out this project. And so we had so many people, being told like, oh, hey, if you like Nocterra, you should check out the OZ. So we rode that wave. And, the second Kickstarter, we overlapped with Boom's first Berserker campaign. I mean, our timing was sensational. And we were very lucky. As a result, a lot of more people came to Kickstarter. And so it really is, it is a platform built on sort of collaborative signal boosting between projects. And that's not even talking about the creators involved. That's something that I was told very early on by a buddy of mine, Charlie Stickney, who is the writer and creator of White Ash, and which is kind of like I consider sort of the prototypical Kickstarter comic success story. If you haven't read it, if you haven't backed it, you should definitely back it. It's excellent work. And he told me, like, find out who's sort of in your class on Kickstarter, who's running campaigns at the same time, back their campaigns, reach out and just be like, hey, like, you want to do some cross promotion, because really, like, it is everybody who's on Kickstarter, they're in it for love of the game. They love comics. They love comics so much that they don't care if Spider-Man's not involved. They just want to see what's interesting and what's unique. And I think those people are, they're heroes. They're real patrons of the arts. And so, yeah, I love the platform. And I think Kickstarter is such a great place for also the comics industry. It's a wonderful incubator for talent, especially for talent who maybe is overlooked, or maybe they don't have a big enough name to be considered by a mainstream publisher, or maybe their concept is just like a little too avant-garde, and they've pitched to publishers who either maybe a little more conservative in their thinking of what they think can sell, or they don't necessarily see the value, or maybe just the timing is wrong. I mean, there's a million reasons why a publisher might turn down your work. But if you believe in the work enough, you can get it made. And that's because of the power of a platform like Kickstarter. You don't have to ask anybody's permission anymore to make a comic, and to make a comic in a way that's not going to, throw you horribly into debt. Kickstarter, because of the price points being what they are, you can sort of make comics financially viable, maybe not necessarily to live on, but to at least like not go into debt making them. And so I feel like, I think it's a wonderful platform, and it's something that, because of there's all these different constituencies of the comics readership, I think it's incumbent, I think it's incumbent upon all creators, there's many of us as we can, to have a finger in all these different kind of ponds, because you want to be able to cross pollinate. You want to be able to, I do this, I call my stump speech. I talk about it in almost every interview. I look at comics as an industry in existential terms. I look at it in through the lens of sustainability. How can we act as good stewards to this medium, to this industry, to this business, in a way that we can sort of keep growing the pie, that we can invite more readers to the table. I always say I don't want to preach to the choir. I want converts. There's always room to build a bigger table. And that's the reason why I love doing conventions so much, is because I'm able to sort of do kind of like market testing in the wild of people who don't necessarily read comics week in and week out. It sort of is a good reminder of, how do I make these things feel accessible? How do I sort of lower the bar for entry, that all you got to do is read the book, and you'll appreciate it, you'll understand it. But yeah, Kickstarter is sort of like, I think that's the foundation for a lot of this thinking. And so it's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful platform. And I will stay there. I will stay on that platform as long as there's a readership there, as long as it's a viable platform. I will be there as often as I can.
Yeah, because I mean, it's such a normal part of the comic book community now. Like Kickstarter, it is not so new, but it's just so familiar. And like you touched upon too, it's a great place to go find unknown creators and get behind great stories, and then watch them grow from there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what winds up happening, I mean, you see it happen every so often. There was one Kickstarter. Why am I blanking on the name? I want to say it was called Beastlands, but maybe I have that wrong. Yeah, it's Beastlands. Like they were a Kickstarter sensation, and then, Dark Horse discovered them. And so like, and so that winds up being a real happy ending for them, where like they were able to sort of create this book thanks to the vision and the support of ordinary Kickstarter backers. And then, because they proved that they had an audience, now they've got a book that's like in bookstores, and it's immortalized in sort of the broader culture that way. So there's always a lot of cross-pollination between, the different sections of the industry. And I don't think it's reductive. I think it is really, I think the overlap is fairly minimal. I do think it is an additive thing, but having sort of a foot on both sides, it means that oh, hey, my Kickstarter backers, maybe you haven't read Space Ghost or Speed Racer. Well, it's a good thing that we've got tiers where you can get those books, or add-ons where you can just get them a la carte. You know, or if you are, you know, a Wednesday warrior who's checking out, you know, Captain Planet, and then they see on, you know, on an interview like this, or they see in my social media, they're like, oh, hey, he's got like his own self-published thing. Well, let me check that thing out. And oh, hey, like they're going to read the story. And especially if they miss the whole thing and they buy all 3 issues at once, whether digitally or in print, this thing's going to hit like a truck. I feel very confident in this story and the execution that we've done for it. I'm very proud of it. You know, and great. You know, I think this is some of my best work. And so when they read this, they're going to be like, oh, he's capable of something really cool, I think. Maybe that'll make me more invested to continue with his other work. So it really is a win-win. I don't think there's anything reductive about any of it. I think it just goes to show that comics as an industry is there's a lot of different, it's very flexible, I should say.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I'm very excited for all of this.
Now, listen, I'm super excited. I'm always super excited for, you know, the OZ. I'm super excited for everything comes out. But you know what I'm also super excited for?
What are you excited for?
Listen, I've held on. I've held on a long time for this, because let's be honest, I'm sure you get tired of hearing me pontificate once a month when I review the glorious book that is known as Space Ghost. And I say things like, I always mention how it's and I mean this, it is for your money, the best comic on the shelves as an ongoing series. And I also